Hey guys, this is Jake Calder with Jay Unboxing with a fight preview for Jake Paul versus Tommy Fury. And we'll start off with a little bit of fight info here. This is Jake Paul, as mentioned, taking on Tommy Fury. This will be taking place in Saudi Arabia. The town, the arena, not particularly important. I doubt most of us will be making that trek anyway, but in Saudi Arabia. This will be airing on ESPN pay-per-view in the States and BT Sport pay-per-view over in the United Kingdom, and it will be taking place in the sort of light cruiserweight division, so to speak, at a catch weight of 185 pounds. And before I dig into my initial thoughts here, I would love to know your guys' thoughts on this fight when you kind of first heard it was announced, the first, second, third, or fourth time that you heard it announced, whatever it might have been. Who do you think is going to win this fight? All that good stuff. Go ahead and leave that down in the comments section below. Getting into my initial thoughts here, the kind of first thought that I had when I think of any real Jake Paul fight, to be perfectly honest with you, is how hard these sort of fights are to predict. You just don't have a great deep well of knowledge as to the kind of fighters they are. You know, you've seen a few fights now, potentially, if you're someone that has watched Jake Paul's career here, but it's still difficult to kind of really get a good gauge for who he is as a fighter. Same thing with Tommy Fury, for that matter. Any young fighter, it's really hard to grasp who's going to come out on top in this one. What makes it more interesting or difficult, whatever you want to call it, is because you're now matching them against two guys that might be each other's toughest test as professionals. So they're still developing, they're still relatively young, they're still raw fighters in terms of, how they're going to be shaped in their exact style. They're still, gaining their sort of ring legs and trying to get the win to be able to fight 8, 10, 12 rounds. And all of this is in play, and now you're saying, oh yeah, now they're going to match up against each other. Now pick it. It's just difficult to do in general, especially when you have a fighter who, in Fury, should be more of an actual experienced, professional, seasoned fighter, but has also at times been accused of not taking the sport seriously enough and not being quite good enough. On the other hand, you have Paul, who seems to take the sport very, very seriously, but has really been a late bloomer as a fighter, so to speak, as he really hasn't been involved in the sport his entire life. So it's just such a difficult fight to predict in those sort of ways. The next thought I had, of course, was just how well will this fight do? You look at sort of the pay-per-view record of Paul, and it's kind of been hit or miss. He's had the rematch with Tyron Woodley, which didn't do great. He had the Anderson Silva fight, which was okay. He started off, of course, with a bang just because of the sort of novelty of it all and his fans wanting to watch him on pay-per-view. But, his fan base is relatively young. Are they willing to shell out 60, 70, 80 bucks every time he's fighting? Probably not. I wonder if they're willing to do it in this case. I think they might, potentially, just because of the fact that this is kind of a bitter feud between the two of them. There actually seems to be some genuine dislike, at least to some degree, between the two of them. I think they both see each other as an opportunity, and I think that obviously is going to breed some natural dislike for the other person. You don't want to be looked at as the opportunity, so I think it certainly adds to the kind of spiciness to the fight, if you will. But will that translate into big business for the pair of them? That's the question that I kind of had when this fight was announced and seemed like it finally would actually take place. Of course, again, you'll never know until the fight actually happens, but certainly something that I kind of kept in my mind here. And in terms of what's at stake, well, obviously there's a couple things for both fighters here. The first one is, of course, pride and ego. Those are the first two things that come to mind. This fight is really taking place between two people who do not want to lose to the other guy. Paul certainly doesn't want to lose to Fury. He wants to beat a guy who's kind of badmouthed him, belittled him, said he wasn't a real fighter. Of course, he naturally does. Fury definitely doesn't want to be the first quote-unquote real boxer that Paul faces and ends up losing. And if he loses by knockout, all the worse. So this is certainly an issue of they both, maybe for the first and only time in their careers, more than anything, want to not lose more than they even want to win. They just do not want to lose to this other guy. Paul, specifically, there's a WBC ranking at stake here, which is a crazy sentence that I obviously never thought I would say in my life, yet here we are in 2023. That's boxing. That's what happens when you don't have the best fighters fighting each other consistently. You have guys who started out on Disney getting WBC rankings. Now, let's not blow this too far out of proportion. Let's not act like a ranking within these crummy organizations is all that big of a deal to begin with. I mean, I believe it was the WBA ranked a dead guy once. So, I mean, technically by default, Paul should be ranked above that guy at the very least. He has a pulse. That should help. So it's not the biggest deal in the world, but it does at least add some credibility to his resume, if you will, if he does get that ranking. And that's certainly something that's, I would have to say, is at stake for him, of course. And the careers of both men is kind of at stake here, certainly as it pertains to them being boxers. If Paul cannot win this fight, we kind of know his level. He can't even beat guys we're not even sure are going to make it in boxing. That just pretty much puts an end to this run for him. Conversely, if Fury cannot get rid of this guy, it's not as damaging to some degree. He is facing a guy who might be naturally bigger than him in some ways, but nonetheless, it's certainly a blow to his ego, his career, his pride, the lineage he comes from in terms of his fighting family. It's not going to be a great look, and it's certainly something that I think he feels is on the line in this fight, that kind of ability to call himself the true boxer, the true fighter in this one, and move forward with that tag. It will be harder if he loses to Paul. And for the winner, if it's Jake Paul, of course, you're talking some legitimacy. This will be the first fighter. This will be his ranking in the WBC. The first boxer, I should say. His ranking in the WBC. This is really going to be the thing that kind of gives him that stamp. Will it mean that he's going to become the best fighter that's ever lived, and now he's this, world champion in the making in the next 1 or 2 years? Not necessarily. Probably not, one might even argue. It certainly does add some legitimacy to what he's been doing for the last couple of years. For Fury, it's respectability in the sport. It sounds crazy, but he will have some cachet being the guy to knock off Jake Paul. Just as much as he's not going to be able to necessarily live down losing. If he wins, it's at the very least, this is who he becomes. It's that sort of Shang Tsung effect that I like to joke about in boxing. Sometimes it doesn't really work. If you happen to be the guy who beats the guy, it doesn't always mean you become that big of a star. But in some cases, you can sort of take on a little bit of their fan base, take on a little bit of their notoriety. You're the guy that beat this crossover star. You're going to at least make some fans out of it. At the very least, boxing purists who are happy that you did such a thing. So you do have something on the line in terms of just being able to kind of build off of this win, which of course is what both of them are trying to do. This is their kind of ticket to either legitimacy in the case of Jake Paul, or the respectability that Fury's looking for within the sport as himself, because again, he's always trying to kind of get out of the shadow of his brother. I think he would admit he's there at this point in his career, and he's certainly looking to try and get out of that, as most, I'm imagining, would want to do. And for the loser, if it's Paul, that could mean you just never have a chance of being taken seriously in boxing. That might seem a little harsh, but it just is the truth. If he can't beat someone, again, who is not necessarily a surefire, legitimate, top-level fighter, there is no chance of him making it in the sport, in my opinion. He just started a bit too late. He just doesn't have it, whatever it might be. That really is going to be the tag on him. Now, is it impossible that he technically proves that wrong down the line? Of course not. Nothing is necessarily impossible, but I certainly wouldn't be betting on that at that point. For Fury, it means you're never getting out of your brother's shadow. It means you never are really going to be taken as your own individual identity with your own real threats, your own real goals and ambitions. Maybe that was never going to happen, because that is unfortunately the way the sport works. Certain fighters are just known. You could look at a Hall of Fame fighter like a Rafael Marquez, still sort of lives in his other Hall of Fame brother's shadow. That is just the way the sport can be sometimes, but if you're losing this fight, it's definitely how it's going to be if you're Tommy Fury. And I think, again, for either of these men, it's the humble pie, the shame that they're going to have to endure if they lose this fight. And I must stress, I really don't think either man wants to lose this one. Of course, who wants to lose a fight? That sounds like an idiotic statement. But to this guy, at this particular moment, when they need this win against this person to prove what they need to prove in the sport, it's certainly something I think both are desperate to try and avoid. But in any event, let me know what you guys think down in the comments. How do you view this fight? How do you think it's going to go? Who do you think is going to win? What are some of your initial thoughts? As I mentioned, would love to hear all that down in the comments section below. Of course, you can check out the link in the description box for my prediction to Jake Paul versus Tommy Fury. We'd love if you guys check that out as well. Please be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe. You guys have definitely been doing that lately. I love that, of course. Follow me on Twitter at jcalderon_JOB as well. You can email me at junboxing@gmail.com. Would love it if you checked out junboxing.com for the schedule, results, betting odds, rankings, news, all that good stuff. Just updated the schedule fully with the odds, everything all the way through for a couple of months, so you can definitely check that out as well. And as always, until next time.